Welcome to today's webinar, How Little Policymakers Know About What They Imagine They Can Design, a title paraphrase from a famous statement by one of the key economic thinkers we will discuss today, Friedrich Hayek. This webinar is sponsored by the Law and Economics Center at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School. I'm Donald Koshin, a professor of law here at Scalia Law, as well as the executive director of the Law and Economics Center. I'll be moderating this discussion today. This webinar is designed around the mission of the Law and Economics Center to serve as a nexus for academic research and education that focuses on the timely and relevant economic analysis of legal and public policy issues confronting judges and policymakers nationwide. All of it is centered around the belief that when judges, academics, and policymakers understand economics, they're more likely to make sound decisions and engage in rigorous analysis that supports the rule of law and the free enterprise system. And our commitment is to developing original, high-quality law and economics programming like we have for you today to further enhance economic understanding and provide information that's useful in the legal and public policy debates surrounding these issues. Thank you to all of you joining us today to be part of that ongoing dialogue. Our topic today focuses on economics as a humility-inducing discipline. So much of what core principles of economics teaches decision makers is that a failure to understand basic economics can lead to making decisions with serious unintended consequences. Such errors are particularly acute when one does not consider opportunity costs or trade-offs involved in choosing one path over another. And as we will especially discuss today, political decision makers often think they can fix things, yet fail to see the complexity of the world, the limits of human capacity, and the impossibility of planning, oftentimes causing unintended harm. Our presenters today have long and distinguished academic records studying these issues, and they are two of the clearest and very best communicators of these lessons. Hence, we wanted to bring them together for the benefit of the broad LEC audience today. So that we can reserve time for substantive discussion, I will give only very brief and basic introductions rather than extensive bios, but I do recommend that you click on our presenters' fuller bios in the email that you received as part of this webinar series, or go to masonlec.org, that's masonlec.org, to learn more about their impressive backgrounds. Our distinguished panel today includes Dr. Donald Boudreau, who's a senior fellow in the F.A. Hayek Program for Advanced Study in Philosophy, Politics, and Economics, and the Martha and Nelson Getchell Chair, for the Study of Free Market Capitalism at the Mercatus Center, and also professor of economics here at George Mason University. Previously, Don was president of the Foundation of Economic Education and an associate professor of legal studies and economics at Clemson University. He also serves as an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He earned a PhD in economics from Auburn University and a law degree from the University of Virginia. Following Don, we'll have Dr. Bruce Yandel, who's a distinguished adjunct fellow at the Mercatus Center here at George Mason. He's the Dean Emeritus of the Clemson College of Business and Behavioral Sciences and the former executive director of the Federal Trade Commission and senior economist on the President's Council on Wage and Price Stability. Among his many contributions to economic thought, in 1983, Bruce developed the Bootleggers and Baptists political model, in which opposite moral positions lead to the same vote. He's going to explain to you what that means a little bit in his remarks, along with other things. And he received his PhD and MBA from Georgia State University and his BA from Mercer University. The panelists will each give brief lectures on the topics at hand and then engage each other in discussion for a few minutes before turning it over to audience questions. If you do have a question, please submit questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A box should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please keep your questions brief so that we can incorporate them into this webinar format. And please also identify yourself. We'll look through those questions and pose as many as we can to our panelists here today. With that, to get us started, I turn it over to Don Boudreau.
Thanks, Donald. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me. It's certainly an honor to be, again, if only electronically, with my dear friend Bruce Yandel. I want to reveal myself at the start as that most contemptible of persons among modern elites, and that is a Pollyanna about the way markets work. Because I think this is relevant for understanding the background of regulation, of government regulation of markets. So there are three ways that I want to highlight that our world today, those of us in America, Western Europe, Australia, three ways in which our world is categorically different from the world of the vast majority of human beings who ever trod this globe. The first way is obvious. We're enormously richer. We're doing this Zoom call now. This wasn't even possible 20 years ago, much less 2,000 years ago. We're sitting in air-conditioned offices, which is very nice, given that it's scorching here in DC today. We're all well-fed. We don't suffer from famine. We fly in planes. We drive in automobiles. We have smartphones. We're just enormously richer, about 3,000 times richer, according to the economic historian Deirdre McCloskey, than were the vast majority of any of our pre-industrial ancestors. So that's obvious, I think, and I think it's important. But even more remarkable is how that comes about. So a second way in which we differ from the vast majority of the people who came before us, before the industrial age, is that we are enormously dependent upon strangers. Our pre-industrial ancestors depended a bit on strangers, but the vast majority of what they consumed is something that they either produced themselves personally. They helped build their own hut, make their own pottery, or they knew the people who built the things that they consumed, who grew the food, who wove the baskets, who made the barrels, who tailored the clothing. They knew those people. They could identify them by face, by and large. Today, we are, each of us, dependent upon, in some cases, billions of strangers spread around the globe. Think about the clothes on your back, the food you had for breakfast, the food you're going to have for lunch. Think of the air conditioning that you're enjoying, the cars you drive in, the airplanes you fly in, your smartphones. Who made those things? You have no idea. All these strangers, and today it truly is a web of strangers spread around the globe. All these things come from strangers. We rely on strangers for our very lives. And it seems to work pretty well because we're all well-fed and we're all well-shod and we have air conditioning. That's pretty amazing. How does that happen? It's an astonishing thing. In fact, it's also astonishing that it happens so regularly, we take it for granted. We walk to the supermarket, go into the supermarket, and there's milk in the refrigerator. There's the canned goods. There are fresh vegetables available. We take it for granted. If you walk into a supermarket and you found no milk or you found no broccoli, you would be astonished. So, wow, this is something wrong with the supermarket. I'm never coming here again. I'm gonna go to the other one down the street. And so it works so well, we don't even think about it working. And yet it all depends somehow upon strangers having their productive activities coordinated in a way that bring us these things on a regular basis. But a third way in which our lives differ categorically from those of our pre-industrial ancestors, and this I think is the most remarkable way, is that not only are we dependent upon lots of strangers, many more than our ancestors were, for the things that we consume. Everything that we consume, or the vast majority of things that we consume, is something that no person knows how to make or could possibly know how to make. The vast majority of things that were consumed in the pre-industrial period are things that some person could describe pretty much from beginning to end: how to construct, how to make a pottery bowl, how to build a mud hut, how to make a thatched roof, how to build a carriage wheel, how to build a carriage, how to cut out a canoe. One or two people had all that knowledge in their head. The vast majority of what we consume today, it consists of knowledge spread out over many, in some cases, millions or billions of minds, M-I-N-D-S. In the flyer for this program, the famous iPencil story was mentioned. And the reason that story, which I'm going to share with you just in case you are unfamiliar with it, that story is so powerful precisely because the pencil is such a simple device. We take it for granted. I'll soon turn 65 years old. I've used pencils all my life. I don't ever recall purchasing one. They're just around. You want a pencil, you dig behind the cushion in your couch, or you pull out you look in your junk drawer and there's one there, or you ask a stranger, hey, can I have a pencil? And they give you a pencil. And yet it's a remarkable product. No one knows how to make a pencil. It's actually a lot more complicated than it looks, but let's keep it simple. There are roughly half a dozen elements in this pencil. There's the cedar wood, There's the lead, which you know isn't lead. It's a combination of graphite and clay. There's the enamel paint to keep your fingers from getting splintered when you use the pencil. There's the aluminum ferrule that holds the eraser onto the shaft of the pencil. By the way, that's one of the few ways in which the pencil today differs from how pencils were until about 1980 or 85. Until then, the ferrule was made of brass. Now it's made of aluminum. Otherwise, today's pencils are just the same as they were when I was a young man. And there's the eraser, which of course is rubber and the stuff from volcanic ash mixed together. And so what would it take for one person to know how to make this pencil? Well, if one person were to have in his or her head every bit of knowledge required to make this pencil, that person, I've already told you, it's cedar wood. That person would have to know where to find cedar trees. That's easy. And then but that person would have to know how to get that cedar tree into a nice octagonal shape, such as this, with a perfectly round cylindrical center, such that when you put the lead in and you try to sharpen the pencil, the lead sharpens rather than cracks. So that person would have to know how to build an axe or make a saw, which means that person would have to know how to get iron ore, how to dig in the ground, how to smelt the iron ore, how to turn the iron ore into a blade for an axe or for a saw. Already that's a lot of information. The pencil person would then have to know where to get the clay. There are 30,000, I think, more or less varieties of clay just in the United States, I'm told. Pencil person would have to know how to get the clay, how to mix it with the graphite, how to build an oven to turn the clay into and graphite mixture into this. Pencil person would have to know where to find the graphite and where to find the bauxite to make the aluminum, how to build a machine in order to turn the bauxite and countless other ingredients into aluminum. Making aluminum requires a lot of electricity, so pencil person would have to know how to build an electrical generating machine and all the wires that transmit the electricity from the generator into the electrolysis machine that makes the aluminum. Pencil person would have to know how to get to Brazil or Malaysia in order to get rubber, how to tap the rubber trees, turn that sap into rubber that's suitable for a pencil eraser, how to get the pumice to make to mix with the rubber. And maybe the most complicated thing of all is the paint. This is probably a petroleum-based paint, could be linseed oil. Pencil person would have to know how to dig, how to explore for oil, how to find it, how to drill for oil, how to turn the crude oil into a base such that when it's mixed with, in this case, a yellow dye, it turns into paint. That's just scratching the surface of the pencil. The point is, this pencil has in it the knowledge of, no one could possibly know the exact number. I'm going to give a conservative estimate. 100 million people. It took the knowledge of 100 million people to make this pencil happen. The vast majority of them had no idea that when they went to work that morning that they were making a pencil that I'm going to hold today in a Zoom lecture. They had no idea they were contributing to pencils. They just went off to work in the oil field or on the rubber plantation. They had no idea, but their efforts somehow came together at some point, some of those efforts to make a pencil. And you know what's remarkable? Even though I've never purchased a pencil, I don't recall ever buying a pencil, I Googled the price of a pencil. You can go to Staples and you can buy a package of 10 pencils. And each pencil will cost you about 10 cents. The average manufacturing worker today in America earns an hourly wage such that that worker can work for 4 seconds and earn enough income to buy one pencil. Think about that. A worker in America today goes to the factory, works for 4 seconds, earns enough income to purchase something that it takes 100 million at least people to produce. That's astonishing. And of course, what's true for a pencil is true countless times over for really complicated things like smartphones or the computers that we're looking at, the clothes on our back, Toyota Camrys and 737 jets that fly overhead, and the house or the office building that you're now inhabiting. All of these things are built for us by strangers, and none of these things can be grasped by any one person in order for that person to know all that there is to know to produce those things. We have this system we've somehow stumbled upon in the last 200 or 300 years, a system that encourages people to produce, and to produce in a way that results in this incredibly prolific stream of outputs of things that make modern life what we expect it to be. And it does so very well, so very silently, that again, we take it for granted. And we only notice it on those relatively rare occasions when there's a hiccup. You notice it if you go to the supermarket and there's no skim milk that you want to buy. There's only 2% and whole milk. No skim milk. We notice it when a refinery goes offline and there are localized gasoline shortages for a few days. We obviously noticed it during the COVID lockdowns, but even then we survived somehow, and none of us went hungry in today's world. And so the irony here is a lot of regulation, government regulation that's called for, and some of it may be justified and necessary. The irony is that regulation is called for when we notice hiccups in this incredibly complex global system, globe-spanning system of markets. And I often worry that in calling for regulation, the people who call for it, and certainly the people who carry it out, don't appreciate just how complex is the market order into which the regulators will intervene. And that's a real danger. If we don't understand the complexity, if we don't understand just how much knowledge is being used to produce things from the pencil to 777 jets, 787 jets, then there's a risk that the regulation will backfire, that it won't actually achieve what it seeks to achieve, or that it will achieve what it seeks to achieve at a cost far greater than we expect, that we don't appreciate. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend Bruce to say more about regulation.
Thank you, Don. And let me remind the audience before Bruce gets started that you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. We will, that queue will develop, and we'll get to those questions shortly after the opening remarks. Bruce, take it away. You're muted, Bruce. Bruce, can you hear me? You're muted.
Mute.
There
Okay.
you go. We've got you now.
Now we're fixed. Thanks a lot, Don. Don, it's great to be with you again, Don Boudreau. We've chewed on lots of issues over many years, and we're back together again. The marvelous forces that you've described, these market forces, still matter a lot when we try to regulate. You've introduced the notion that there are times where there are problems, and some people call them market failures, where government comes in and says, let's see if we can't make things better. And when that happens, of course, the regulator assumes the challenge of the knowledge problem, which you have described so fully for us. Let me take you to a familiar scene to sort of launch this discussion of regulation. Maybe this is something that has happened to you. A few years ago, Dot and I had some visitors from Slovenia who were not all that familiar with America and life here. And as they were getting to our home and we were having dinner together, we said, well, what would you like to see? Maybe you would like to go down and see historic Charleston here in South Carolina, quite an interesting place. And they looked at each other for a minute and they said, well, what we would really like to do is go to a Walmart. Because we don't have anything like that in our cities, and we'd like to go to a Walmart. So imagine that you go to a Walmart or to a grocery store. They wanted to see a big grocery store, and you're in the parking lot, and it's the current time period. As you look at the parking lot, it's full of vehicles. Most of them are SUVs. Some are pickup trucks, and there are a few sedans. And if you stand there a few minutes, you will perhaps see a familiar sight. A woman walks out who may weigh 120 pounds. She gets in this 5,000-pound SUV, puts the key in the ignition, turns on a 300 horsepower motor, puts in her sack that has a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk, and heads home. And as you look at the picture, your guests are saying, there's something about this that doesn't look quite right. We don't move around in giant vehicles like that where we come from. How do you explain that? Oh, the explanation has to do with our pursuit of fuel efficiency. And so there's this kind of, you mean this came about because of fuel efficiency? Yes. It was perhaps an unintended outcome. So to understand that, let's go back a bit and think about America's first encounter with fuel efficiency standards. It came about after the 1973 Arab oil embargo, and our politicians in Congress did not want Americans to have to suffer from high-priced gasoline. And so we put in a system of price controls that limited the price increases of gasoline that we would all encounter. And that also required a system of allocation of gasoline by state. And no one really knew how much gasoline to give to each state. And so somebody came up with the idea, well, let's use last year's consumption patterns for gasoline distribution to every filling station, 7-Eleven outlet in America based on the past, and we'll regulate the price. And of course, since the price was regulated below what might be called market equilibrium, demand, the quantity demanded was large, we bumped into shortages, and everything had changed in that year. And so what seemed like the right allocation for Chitlin Switch, Georgia, turned out not to be so good. They had gasoline running out of their ears, but then some folks over in Savannah didn't have enough. And so that was part of the problem, and it was part of this knowledge problem. And so as things continued to roll, Congress decided, well, what we need to do is to get the auto industry to produce the kinds of vehicles they would have produced if we had allowed the price to go up. They would then have produced more fuel efficient automobiles. And so we will get the auto industry to produce fuel efficient automobiles. And so they passed legislation in 1975, setting the first CAFE standard, which would take place in 1978. And the last one in that legislation was 5 years later. And then they said, Department of Transportation, you fill in the blanks for the intervening years. And now in the regulations that were passed, there were rather severe increases in the fuel efficiency for sedans, for automobiles, but not much for pickup trucks. And so the intervening fuel economy, by the way, the question as to what would be the rate of increase in fuel efficiency was a big question. I participated in those proceedings at the Department of Transportation, and there in the room were representatives of the major auto companies. Well, it turned out that General Motors said, let's load it up heavily up front. Let's require higher fuel efficiency sooner, and then let it be less later. Well, why would they take that position? They had already downsized their fleet. And Chrysler's representative said, if you do that, we'll go bankrupt. And somebody said, give those people a crying towel. They're already always complaining. And so those numbers got filled in, and they were uploaded pretty heavy on the front end. And General Motors had competed in the political economy and perhaps improved their position. But then because the pickup trucks did not get hit hard, consumers looked around on the lots and they saw these small vehicles, almost lawnmower size with small engines that were being produced relative to what they had seen in the past. And they saw these nice looking pickup trucks. And so pickup truck sales increased and they got fancier. And all of a sudden, Ford Motor Company developed a body that they put on their F-150 pickup truck frame, and lo and behold, the first Explorer hit the market. Then the Lincoln Navigator, and then the Lincoln Aviator, and then the Suburbans, on, and then vans, but they were all trucks. And they had a lighter regulatory burden on them than did the vehicles. Suddenly, the SUV became the popular vehicle, all in the name of fuel efficiency, and people moved away from sedans. I don't think that was intended by the regulators. And so as things moved on and the pickup truck sales exploded, the auto industry lobbied and got tariffs, restrictions placed on the importation of pickup trucks from foreign countries. And so the market got protected. And then the auto industry persuaded the executive branch to lobby Japan to impose voluntary restraints on the shipment of vehicles from Japan, which they did successfully. And so our search for fuel efficiency then led to the cartelization of the Japanese auto market by government in Japan, as they provided the tickets for vehicles to be shipped to America. And our industry was already cartelized by regulation. And so government became endogenous to the industry. It was no longer a case of intervening in a marketplace. Government became a participant in the industry. And so then when the industry gets in trouble, government bails them out. And now we have that strange picture in a way. President Biden is talking right now, as we talk, about raising the fuel economy standards that are in place for the American fleet. Meanwhile, the standard has been raised significantly for light vehicles, trucks included, but talking more about raising the standard. But the conversation is not couched in terms of fuel efficiency, it's couched in terms of global climate change, the fundamental threat to civilization as we know it. And so now, when we talk about automobiles and fuel efficiency and miles per gallon, the discussion has taken on an ethical or a moral dimension. And so it is, what is the right thing to do? What is the moral thing to do? And when morality gets wrapped into the regulatory process, that introduces the notion of bootleggers and Baptists. And so Baptists, in quotation marks, love laws that shut down liquor stores on Sunday. And bootleggers love those laws too, provided they're carefully enforced, because that eliminates competition one day a week. And the bootlegger goes to the liquor store on Saturday, buys booze and puts it in the drinking houses for sale on Sunday. And the bootlegger doesn't have to go down and lobby with a sign in front of the state legislature saying, help your local bootlegger make a dishonest living. The Baptists do it for them. And the Baptists make sure that the laws are enforced. Notice, most drinking laws, none that I know of, ever prohibit drinking on Sunday. They prohibit selling on Sunday. The bootleggers would never support a law that prohibits drinking, and maybe a lot of Baptists might not either, but the combination of the two. And so now we get to fuel efficiency again, and now it's climate change, and now it's electric vehicles, and now there's a subsidy that goes to the producer of electric vehicles provided by the gas engine producers, because they are not able to hit the new standard, but they can buy permits or rights from Tesla. And so in one recent year, Tesla received $1.4 billion in fees paid by the auto industry, while everyone is celebrating this wonderful electric car producer that has emerged. And so let me stop and take a quick breath. And now we look at this industry and you say, is that happening anywhere else? Well, there's something called the CHIP Act. And so now government has stepped in to address the problem of the scarcity of microchips. And of course, we could add to this list as we think about regulation, how it expands, the knowledge problem that is encountered, and perhaps the unexpected outcomes that arise. Now, we in economics received a warning about this years ago in 1759 when Adam Smith wrote his Theory of Moral Sentiments. He referred to what he called the man of systems. Think about that as the politician who is trying to bring together enough information to solve a very complex problem. Smith said he seems to imagine that he can arrange the different members of a great society with as much ease as the hand arranges different pieces on a chessboard. He does not consider that the pieces on the chessboard have no other principle of motion besides that which the hand impresses on them, but that in the great chessboard of human society, every single piece has a principle of motion of its own, altogether different from that which the legislature might choose to impress upon it. And so we're talking about billions of free agents that Don has described, who are out there figuring out how to make a living and maybe make it better. And all of those strangers that are cooperating, even though they don't realize they are cooperating to provide us with our daily meals and comforts. And now when we try to intervene, we bump into issues and problems that could not have been imagined before. And the knowledge problem then hits us between the eyes. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you, Bruce. Don, any thoughts on what Bruce just introduced?
No, it's just a beautiful story of the unintended consequences of regulation. Sometimes they are genuinely unintended. One of my favorite examples is occupational licensing for electricians. There was a study done a number of years ago that found a positive correlation between the strictness of regulating entry into the profession of being an electrician and the number of electrocutions in a state. Some states regulate, set the requirements about who can and under what conditions set up shop as an electrician. And those states where it's more difficult to become an electrician, where the qualifications are higher, you'd think that having higher qualifications would lead to lower electrocutions because you get better electrical work. But in fact, the opposite occurs. You have more people being electrocuted in states that have very strict requirements on who can and who can't set up shop as an electrician. And again, of course, the explanation is when you restrict entry into being an electrician, you raise the cost of hiring an electrician. And people then do more electrical work at home on their own, and they're not as good as even a fairly modestly talented electrician, and so you get more electrocutions at home. So that I think that's an unintended consequence of regulating the quality of people who can practice as electricians. But Bruce pointed out an unintended consequence of the fuel efficiency regulations. We wound up getting these gigantic SUVs because the regulators didn't think about the differences between trucks and sedans. And so in thinking about regulation, we encounter two knowledge problems and the unintended consequences. No one predicted it, but it happens, and very often the unintended consequences are negative. But the second knowledge problem is the knowledge that most people don't have, that people special interest groups can cleverly use the regulations in order to bring about benefits for them that come at the larger expense of the general public. This is the Baptist and bootlegger story that Bruce was telling. So I don't want to talk too much longer, but the general lesson here is that the market economy is so complex, and hence intervening into it is to intervene into this incredibly complex system of arrangements that we don't have the mind of God. God might be able to predict what all the consequences would be, but no human being can. And there'll always be ripples way down the line that most people, when they've discovered those ripples, find to be unacceptable.
So I have a quick question for both of you. You just mentioned special interests, and we heard about the Baptist and the bootleggers and the different folks who can fit in those categories. Oftentimes, that word special interest is thrown out there as only being business or only sort of financial gain. Can you define what the scope of interest group politics and rent seeking is? Who engages in that behavior? Why do they engage in it? And is it limited only to business?
Well, I would say all individuals seek to get benefits from government or from every way possible, but particularly from government. And so we fall into the category of being a special interest. The amazingly large and successful environmental organizations are seeking restrictions, for example, on the burning of coal, and so do the natural gas producers. And the natural gas producers in recent years made huge contributions to the environmental organizations who were doing their battle for them. They both wanted the same thing. Let's knock coal out of the picture and bring in natural gas. Both wanted the same thing. And so there was sort of a coalescing there of interest. Whether you say it's on a moral plane or just on I need to make more money plane, I think we would look at those special interests in the same way, broadly speaking, as we look at their behavior and try to predict the positions they might take.
Yeah, it's certainly not just producers, not just businesses. No. It's any group that shares an intense interest in some outcome. Of course, business groups share in any industry share an intense interest in getting competitors restricted in order that they can raise their prices and restrict their output. So sugar, it's no mystery why all sugar farmers understand that they share the same interest with other sugar farmers. If the price of sugar goes up, well, their incomes go up. And sure, it's paid for by the general public, but that cost is spread out so widely that people in the general public barely realize it. The typical American today, I think, pays between $20 to $40 more a year. Excuse me, American family, between $40 to $80 more annually because of the U.S. sugar program than they would pay if there were no U.S. sugar program. But those benefits are concentrated on sugar producers. But it doesn't just have to be producers. Bruce mentioned the environmental lobby. These are people who sincerely, they're the Baptists. They have a sincere interest in changing the way we live in order to bring about what they regard to be necessary protection of the environment. We can agree or disagree with them, but they share that interest. And so they coalesce together. And when they coalesce together, they are in a better position to lobby government for the policies they prefer than are the vast majority of people who are also affected by those policies. But we're all spread out, and most of us we don't think of ourselves chiefly as environmentalists, and so we pay the higher price for this product and that product. We might not like it, but we're not. It's such a small element of our lives that we're not motivated to organize and find and organize with other people who share that same interest. And one other special interest I think should be mentioned, and that is government workers themselves. I mean, the workers in the executive branch agencies, these are a special interest. They understand that their material welfare is affected by the size of the government budget and the size of their particular agency's budget, and so they will understandably lobby to increase those budgets. Irrespective, I mean, of course, they'll say, well, this is going to help the general public. Maybe in some cases it will, but their lobbying for those increased budgets and increased powers is done chiefly in order to increase the welfare of the people in the executive branch, and not because they genuinely believe that it's good for the country.
We have quite a few questions, and Bruce, unless you have something to add, I think I'll turn to those.
All right, let's go to the questions and I'll jump in later.
Great. Well, I'm going to combine a couple here. Richard Williams notes that regulators don't understand complex markets. Congress doesn't understand complex regulatory bodies and complex markets. Voters don't understand complex Congress, and complex regulatory agencies and complex markets all come together. Where and how do we intervene is the question there, but I want to combine it with a similar question from Glenn Lyons, where he notes that your stories are wonderful, and it's hard to imagine anyone hearing them who wouldn't be convinced of their wisdom. But do you find most people hearing them are convinced, or is there a significant number that are not? For those that are not convinced, have you found any other ways of convincing them? So I think both questions are kind of asking, how does this message break through? And what's your observation on how well it's broken through in the past? And I think I would add there then, even if it does break through, are there incentives against actually responding to the wisdom on the part of those who are the policymakers?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, I spend a lot of time talking about the complexity of the world. At one level, when you explain it, it's hard for a person to deny it. You can't explain the pencil story and someone go, no, that's just not true. I know a person who can make a pencil from beginning to end. But the problem is the lesson isn't generalized. People see what they think to be is a problem in the market. The market's not working the way they believe it should work, and maybe they're correct. It's working in a way that doesn't suit their fancy, and they want it changed. And so politicians, they are, as Bruce said, they are men of system, that generally speaking. And so they promise, give me the authority to fix this problem, and I promise I'll do it. And they hire Ivy League experts, and they put out position papers, and it all looks so technical and scientific. But none of it, in my view, it comes to grips with the actual complexity of the world. So I don't know any solution other than to keep reminding people that the world's very complex, and it's a level of complexity that cannot be gotten over simply by having another Ivy League PhD in the room, or a dozen more Ivy League PhDs in the room. It's not the kind of it's not the kind of the knowledge that government lacks in order to regulate in what would genuinely be a public interest manner. That kind of knowledge is not the kind of knowledge that you get out of textbooks.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was saying, thanks, Richard, and thanks for the other question on complexity. The thing I think of with respect to your question is try to focus on outcomes. What has happened versus what was hoped for? Could it have been done more effectively so that we would have gotten even more clean air or less dirty coal, as the case may be, than we got? By focusing on outcomes and comparing possible outcomes, maybe we gain a little bit of yardage. But I still have my doubts that we gain much, because it seems to me emotion carries more weight in the context of safety and health, safe food, safe drugs, clean air, eliminating dirt out of the water. Emotion carries more weight than does reason. We are not real good as a people in doing retrospective studies. Hardly anyone ever looks back. I'm speaking of anyone in government agencies. And I understand, I think, why, and because my little experience with it was there was so much pressure to get more things done that nobody had time to go back and look to see, well, what happened with respect to the rules and regulations that we developed 5 years ago. And I think that's another indicator that the emotional content, or what I might put in quotation marks and call the Baptist content, carries so much weight. It's hard to think, and I think it's hard to get other people to think about things like the topic we are exploring here, and to get interested in comparing actual outcomes with what was intended. There's always a new crisis that commands our attention.
So I think a number of our questions actually address what might be the new crises that are coming up. So let me turn to a few of those. One, this is directed at Don, but I think it can go to either Don or Bruce or both. Can you elaborate on the relationship between the knowledge problem and industrial policy, especially as industrial policy is being pushed by folks on both the American right and the left as being a necessary, objective?
Yeah. So first of all, let's distinguish industrial policy as a means of improving the economy's overall performance over time from policies meant to strengthen national defense. I'm going to put the latter aside. We can agree that there are certain policies that we might want to pursue, protect certain minerals for national defense purposes. So let's put that aside. The vast majority of people who, or a large number of people who advocate industrial policy do so because they believe that the market left to its own devices will not invest enough in the right industries and invest too much in the wrong industries. Orrin Cass, who is a modern conservative proponent for industrial policy, described the market as a drunk donkey. So it has no good navigation system. It just goes along intoxicated. It's an intoxicated ass. What Orrin Cass and other proponents of industrial policy as a means of improving standards of living for people don't understand is that the market is not a drunk donkey. Prices direct people, producers and entrepreneurs, where to expand output and where to contract output. Interest rates, assuming that they're not mucked up too much by monetary policy, direct investors on where to invest and how much to invest. Entrepreneurs, ever eager to make more money, more profit, look out at the market and they figure out ways, they spot imperfections, and when they spot an imperfection, they in order to make a profit, they attempt to address that imperfection, to make it to improve matters for consumers. If the entrepreneur is correct, the consumers spend a lot of money buying the entrepreneur's product, and the entrepreneur gets rewarded. If the entrepreneur is incorrect, the entrepreneur pays a price in suffering losses. This system isn't perfect. No one's ever said it's perfect. Of course, there are at any moment the market is failing in countless different ways. But to return to my opening remarks, I think it's important to keep in mind that by and large it works remarkably well. You can't look out at the world that we have and say, well, this is the result of a drunk donkey. So if people, the industrial policy proponents somehow believe that politicians and bureaucrats who are spending and investing other people's money somehow are going to get it right more often than will investors and entrepreneurs spending their own money. Why do we suppose that people spending other people's money are more likely to get these investment decisions right more frequently than will people spending their own money? I find it incredible. And then if you look at the history of industrial policy, its history is not it's not a very promising one. It doesn't give us much good reason for supposing that it's going to work in the future.
Yeah, well, nationalism does seem to be the mood of the era, not just here, but throughout the developed world. And so with that nationalism comes industrial policy. But again, I don't think it seems that the celebration takes place when the law is passed and the president signs it and everybody smiles in the Rose Garden. Okay, we won. What's next? Not many people go and look to see, well, what happened? Well, here's an item from the Wall Street Journal. Foreign firms are shaping up to be some of the biggest beneficiaries of America's new climate-focused industrial policy. Japan's Panasonic expects to reap $2 billion a year. Well, I don't know whether that was expected or not. I sort of doubt that was the expectation when people were celebrating America's industrial policy. And if you're going to produce electric automobiles, they have to be produced here, and they have to have in them batteries that are produced here. And in addition to that, you will have to provide child care for the children of the employees in the plant. So we go on and on. but I doubt that anybody looked. I mean, this was 1 week later that it's foreign firms and their shareholders who will be major beneficiaries. And from the standpoint of one who looks at gains from trade, my response is, well, so what? May the best firm win in this competitive battle. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of looking to see what happens.
Can I say one more thing about industrial policy?
Sure.
So there's not only the knowledge problem, the standard knowledge problem, where bureaucrats and politicians, there's just no explanation for how they're going to get the detailed knowledge that they would have to have in order to allocate resources in a way that over time proves to be better than how those resources are allocated by market forces, by profits and losses. There's another kind of knowledge problem. And that's knowledge. Bruce alluded to this. It's knowledge of what's actually happening. There's much mythology about the nature and the state of the American economy. I hear it said all the time. Bruce, I'm sure you do too, that, well, our manufacturing sector has been hollowed out. This is said as if it's an established truth like gravity, and it's simply untrue. We Americans, our manufacturing output is close to an all-time high. It hit an all-time high just before the Great Recession of 2009. It's ticking back up. Our industrial capacity is today at an all-time high. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about the nature of the problems that we face. A lot of industrial policy advocates immediately discredit themselves, in my eyes, when they make claims about the state of the economy that are easily disproven by going to any government data website, such as the Fred website that the St. Louis Fed has. You can check the claims and you say, well, that claim is false. So if someone is advocating a policy to correct the problem that doesn't even exist as that person describes it, that doesn't give me a lot of confidence that that person's recommendations have merit.
Of course, that masking issue, right? The idea of making claims in that way helps to mask the real underlying motivations behind some of these policies, correct? And it increases the information costs on the part of the dispersed public to really find out about the redistribution that's occurring. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if a claim is made over and over again and repeated in the media as if it's established truth, then ordinary John Q or Jane Q citizen doesn't feel the need to actually check it out. It's just, well, this is established truth, and that makes it easier then to drive policies through Congress or through a regulatory agency that create rents for special interest groups, all in the name of correcting a problem that doesn't even exist very often.
Well, let me turn to Vincent Miozzi, who's a research assistant and PhD student at the Free Market Institute at Texas Tech. He has two questions. Both are on ESG. First, how different are proponents of ESG in industrial policy? And he mentions, to me, it seems like they use largely the same tools, but simply seek different ends. And second, can ESG in industrial policy be understood as an application, or at least a type of in-kind socialism, whereby economic calculation is performed in kind rather than money prices? Any thoughts on how ESG and the push for ESG fits in the framework that you've both been discussing?
I think as far as ESG being a spontaneous response from private corporations who say, this is what we're going to stand for, and you can come and audit us if you want to, but this is what we believe. I say, right on, brother. You can rise or sink on the basis of your position. But if it gets to be a question of the Securities and Exchange Commission developing an auditing measurement of what is ESG and how far have you gone and what is the truth with respect to it, then we're getting a government standard for ESG, and I've got serious misgivings about that. But when Polaroid said, as long as we pay our shareholders more than they can earn anywhere else, then we ought to be free to do things in our communities here in Massachusetts that we just want to do, because that's our little red wagon. I sort of say, right on, that's American capitalism. And if you want to call it ESG, fine. That's sort of my reaction.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I also agree with Vincent. I think I agree that the instinct, the vision that proponents of industrial policy have, and the vision that proponents of ESG have, are very complementary, very similar to each other. It's this notion that somehow, left to their own devices, markets are going to lead to suboptimal outcomes, and that we can improve those outcomes by having people who have access to lots of different resources that they can reallocate consciously. To have those people consciously reallocate those resources in ways that, in their minds, will be superior to the market allocations brought about by relying on the price system and profit and loss system. And I just think it's a form of hubris that is intellectually unsustainable. It's simply mistaken. But that is the vision. We'll have some really smart, caring people allocate resources rather than have resources allocated according to this venal system of commercial profit and loss. Why not have well-meaning people allocate resources consciously?
So Michael DeBow asks that you each speak about how these, what you've just mentioned across this time with us, reflect on the Biden administration's antitrust policies, especially the FTC. So are there some examples coming out of the antitrust world that would be exemplary for your purposes?
Oh, wow. There's so much. We only have 4 minutes. 4 minutes. I'll just say a few words and so we can hear from
Don's into this. Yes, please.
So I think antitrust is an excellent example of a policy where a lot of hubris is in play. Lena Khan doesn't know what the optimal market structure of any industry is. Lena Khan doesn't know what the trade-offs are that companies face when they make different kind of contractual arrangements with workers and suppliers. But antitrust policy, particularly the vigorous kind that's envisioned by the Biden administration, is based on the presumption that intellectuals can somehow know better than do the people with their own money at stake what the optimal industrial structures are, the optimal contracting arrangements are. And that's simply hubris of an almost criminal sort. Bruce?
Yeah, well, just on the basis of the newly proposed guidelines, a lot has been forgotten by the minds at the Antitrust Division of the Justice Department and the Federal Trade Commission. I still think the landmark work was Bork's The Antitrust Paradox. And there was a lot of what was called the new learning in economics that had to do with displacing the notion that bigness by definition is bad. But I think where bigness can become bad is when large firms are in a position to be far more influential with government, and they obtain barriers to entry. They obtain special interest benefits that large firms are able to do because they have economies of scale in lobbying and working government. I think that's what we should be concerned about, not the fact that they're big firms because they're successful in marketplaces.
Yeah, and really quickly, if you look at the history of antitrust, Bruce mentioned Robert Bork's book. It's called The Antitrust Paradox, and the paradox was that, wow, antitrust supposedly was set up to make the economy more competitive, but lo and behold, for the past 90 years, the book came out in the late 70s. Lo and behold, since the Sherman Act was passed, it seems like most of the cases actually suppressed competition and hurt consumers. What a paradox. This is another example of regulation. I think we have bootleggers and Baptists. You have people who really thought, well, we need government to promote competition. You had other people who were using that language as a mask to use government to actually suppress competition in the name of promoting it.
So we have several other questions, which I apologize to the audience, we won't have time to get to. We do want to be respectful of the audience's time and end at 1 o'clock. But it's always great when there are more questions than we can actually get to. That means we've generated a lively discussion. I want to ask each of you to take 90 seconds, though, to close us out. And in that 90 seconds, tell us what you really hope that the listeners and watchers today take away from this program in a nutshell. And I liked the idea of you giving some reading suggestions there. So if along the way you have a suggestion of something they should read or watch that would enlighten them even more after they close out this webinar, what would that be?
Oh, so it won't surprise anyone who's listened to the last hour that the lesson that I wish more people would understand is just how astonishingly, inconceivably complex the modern market economy is. So be almost starstruck at how well it works. This complexity works. So don't forget the complexity. Always keep it in mind. My gosh, I mean, don't read you can read iPencil. It's an essay that came out in 1958. But the Competitive Enterprise Institute a number of years ago put out a video called iPencil, which is wonderful. It's only maybe 5 or 6 minutes, I believe. It's just spectacular. And then related to that, another video was done by my former colleague, Russ Roberts, who is a famous host of Econ Talk. It's called A Wonderful Loaf. It's a play on A Wonderful Life. And look at Google Russ Roberts Wonderful Loaf and look at that. And that pretty much effectively conveys most of the information that I wish more people understood.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that I would try to emphasize is that no matter how old and learned we may seem to be, we don't know a lot. And so that would be a plea for humility with respect to how much we know and therefore how much we can implement. The other thing is to think about, in spite of all of this that we've talked about, the concrete that has been poured many times regulating markets, we still have a phenomenally vibrant market economy. I'm going to call it that, in spite of all that concrete that is on it. And that's almost miraculous that we can work so hard and goof up so many things, but still people are out there putting it together, finding new ways to do things. We have significant gains in productivity that are offsetting some of the burdens that are being imposed. And so that leaves me to be optimistic. And as far as something to read, Matt Ridley's The Rational Optimist would be one book to put on your list if you don't already have it there. But it's been great being with you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Bruce Yandel and Don Boudreau for sharing your expertise with us today. Thank you all for joining us and watching this webinar brought to you by the Law and Economics Center at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School. We hope that you'll join us again for a future webinar. Our website is masonlec.org. That's masonlec.org. You can find out about all of our programming there. There are places to donate as well if you'd like to support educational programming like what you see today. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you on so many different topics in the coming months. Thanks again. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.